Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. One of the advantages of boa constrictors is they're really great feeders, and about 95% of the animals I've worked with, I've had no problem getting them to feed whenever I offer food. But there are some exceptions, and when you work with as many boas as I do, you're going to encounter some finicky feeders. And so today I thought I'd give you guys some of my stories about some of my experiences with these animals and share some tips and tricks that I've used in order to address some problematic feeding behaviors. This animal I'm kind of holding at arm's length. She's a little nippy. She's a 2.5-year-old Qual K boa. And the reason I got her is that she only recently started eating live. So I thought I'd take her out for the video. A lot of times people want baby boas that eat frozen thawed, and I completely understand why. Some of the island boas, like the Qual Key, Cocker Key, Hog Island, they're really picky, and they typically will only eat live babies or live, baby mice when they start. Usually I can switch them over by about 6 months to a year, but there are some holdouts. And this female only started eating live or eating frozen thawed mice a couple months ago. She went for a whole 2 years insisting on live. And luckily she's eating the frozen thawed ones now. But sometimes you just have to accept their behaviors and just deal with it. It wasn't that hard for me to get live mice because I have a breeding colony of mice. If you are thinking about getting into island boas and breeding them, I would definitely recommend you start a breeding colony of mice and or rats, so you can have some live ones to feed to the young boas. Or, find a store that sells live mice that you can feed, or make friends with a local rodent breeder. But if you want a boa that only eats frozen thawed, there are other types of boas that are a lot easier to get eating frozen thawed, but the key boas, unfortunately, are not one of those. So that's the first example of a somewhat problematic feeding behavior, but overall not too difficult. Next example is an animal that has a particular feeding preference, and you might know this guy. This guy is named Mr. Pink. He's a really nice Suriname red tail from the Tuda Hope and Florida red tail bloodlines. The beautiful pink color, and he became a first-time father this year. Some of his babies are still available actually, and while we're talking about it, you can see them on my Flickr page. The link is below the video description. I'm having a huge special, 25% off all 2024 babies until November 20th. So don't miss out. There's still some of his offspring available if you're looking for a top-notch true red tail boa. So this guy I got when he was about 3 years old. And initially he didn't have any, he wasn't at all picky. He ate all of the rodents I offered him. And I would occasionally give him a quail as well, which he loved, and some chicks also. But then about a year ago, he just seemed to not like rodents anymore. Like he would eat rats, but then, I would feed him, and then at the next feeding cycle, 2 or 3 weeks later, he would just pass up the rat. And he was only eating about once a month. And this is right after he ended his first breeding trials. And so I thought, well, why not try quail? Because for a few months he only ate one rodent a month, and I really wanted to pair this guy up again in 2025, which I'm planning on. So I wanted to get some, flush back on him, so he's ready to go for the breeding season. And so a couple months ago, I started offering him quails, and he never refuses the quails. He just loves the quails. I was actually feeding him a quail about every 10 days to make up for the lack of food when he wasn't eating rats. And since then, he's put on some weight, and he's still a small boa. I mean, this is a 5.5-year-old boa. He's only about, I'd say, 4.5 feet. He's a small true red tail. He might get a little bit bigger, but he's never going to be a giant. Not sure how much that was because of his feeding. When I got him at 3 years old, he was still pretty small. But we'll see. Actually, this is a really nice size for a boa. And a lot of people, the true red tails, they think they're going to be too big if a snake gets to be 7 or 8 feet. But having this nice 5-footer is very convenient for some people. And I should also mention that the female I paired him up with is from a Russell LaFleur bloodline. She's 10 years old and she's only about 5 feet. So it's quite possible that the babies from my Suriname litter 4 produced in 2024 might be quite small as adults. Maybe even a dwarf line of true red tail. But this guy, you know, I'm not concerned about his health or anything because he just was eating less. But now with the quail, he's put the weight back on, or he's certainly don't have any qualms about putting him into breeding trials in another few weeks. He'll go without food for about 2.5 months, and then he'll be fed more sparingly over the spring as the breeding trials continue, but back in, you know, decent shape for breeding. So the moral of this story is always try alternate food sources. And a lot of times boas love birds, and a lot of people just feed rodents. But if you throw in a quail or a chicken, your boa will really thank you for it. It also adds variety nutritionally, and it adds, you know, mental stimulation to give them something else to feed on. So don't forget to add the birds to your boa's diet. Next, another example of a snake with a particular feeding preference. I've got here 2 Hog Island Boas. These are actually littermate sisters, born in 2019. And the one in this hand, you can see is quite a bit girthier, quite a bit bigger than this one. And the reason is that this one likes rats, this one doesn't. So I haven't gotten this one to eat any rats. She's eaten just mice and chicks so far. And right now I'm having to feed her like 3 adult mice per feeding, and it's still less bulk than this animal gets. She eats a large rat per feeding, and I've tried many times with this one. She just isn't interested in rats. Not quite sure why. She just wants her mice. And I've seen that a lot of the island boas, they just have these particular preferences for food. And so you can appease them like with this one, but you're going to get less growth. So this animal is actually ready to breed. I don't think I'm going to breed her this upcoming season, but nice animal, maybe 5.5, 6 feet long. Whereas this one is probably about 4.5 feet long and quite a bit thinner, not ready to breed. And these animals are 5 years old, so they should be pretty much pushing, you know, at sexual maturity and breeding readiness. So what I'm going to do, this one I'm going to try to switch to rats, and what I'm going to do is not feed them for another, you know, 2 months or so over the winter cycling. She'll get a little bit hungry, and hopefully it'll kind of reset her dietary preference. And then when probably in January, when I start feeding them again, I'm going to scent a rat. I'm going to thaw a rat and rub it down with, you know, some thawed mice, kind of squeeze the mice on there. I might even try to put the rat in the bedding with my live mice, see if that helps. But I'm going to try to trick this snake into thinking it's eating mice when it's really eating a rat. And hopefully that will enable me to transfer it to eating no more mice and just rats and quails. Might be easier said than done, but I'll give it a shot and hopefully get this animal onto a more convenient diet of rats rather than mice. So that scenting trick is an old trick that people have been using for decades, but I've used it successfully before, and hopefully it'll work again for these Hog Island, or this Hog Island Boa. One more example here, and this is a true red tail, a Suriname red tail. And what some of these animals have in common is that they're all a little bit smaller than you would expect for an animal of the given age. This is actually a 2017 born Suriname red tail. So she's, what, 7 years old, which is typically the age at which almost all female Surinames have hit that breeding size. You know, some of them will be breedable even a year or two before that. But this particular female has just been a picky feeder. And she's from my Prometheus bloodline, actually a daughter of Prometheus himself, from his second and final litter in 2017. And I always loved her look, just beautiful pinky magenta colors and really cool looking saddles. This kind of a different look to a true red tail. She's just always been kind of a picky feeder. So sometimes I'll offer her a frozen thawed rat and she'll coil around it and strike at it, but then she doesn't end up eating it, and I'll come back later and it's just sitting there, and then I'll offer it to her again and she'll coil around it and then spit it out. And it's kind of frustrating if she won't feed. But some boas are just like that. They're just kind of picky. They want to wrap around the prey item, but then they end up not eating it. I see this a lot when I'm switching animals from live to frozen thawed, but some animals, even years after they've started eating frozen thawed, they're still a little bit picky. And it's just how it is, you know. In general, boas are very easy to get to feed, and most of them will eat like pigs, but there are some that are just a little bit more finicky for whatever reason. And so this one appears to be one of those. So I don't know about breeding her. She's not going to breed next year, maybe the year after. She's not, I wouldn't say she's thin, she's just not a big boa. And part of it is just because of her picky feeding habits. You know, not all boas are going to be great breeders. That's just part of the whole breeding experience. I hope you enjoyed the video and it gave you some food for thought. If you're having a boa that has some challenging feeding behaviors, let me know any experiences you might have had in the comments below or any questions. As always, thank you for watching and enjoy your boas.